If you ask ChatGPT which chess opening is very aggressive from the black side, ChatGPT's answer will be the Sicilian Defense. But I asked one more question: why do most people fail to learn the Sicilian Defense? And it replied, because of its complex and vast variations. But in today's video, I will explain the variations of the Sicilian Defense very easily. Let me explain. Before starting the structure of the Sicilian Defense, let me tell you its basics and structure. The Sicilian Defense has two types. If your opponent starts with the knight on the left side, it means they are going to play the open Sicilian, but if they start with the knight on the right side or with any other pieces on the right side, it means they want to play the closed Sicilian. But knowing this much is not enough if you don't know which variations come in the open Sicilian and closed Sicilian. There are thousands of variations in the Sicilian Defense, but you don't need to read all those variations even if you are preparing for a grandmaster. But you should have a good understanding of the Sicilian Defense even if you are a beginner, and that is the main motive of this video. In this video, we will understand a total of 6 variations of the open Sicilian and also the closed Sicilian. The Sicilian Defense starts with e5 and c5. Then your opponent moves the knight to f3. Here, the 3 most common replies from the white side are knight to c6, pawn to d6, and pawn to e6. But before going to knight to e6, I want to start with pawn to e6. You played pawn to e6. The main purpose of moving e6 is that if, in the future, we play pawn to d5, and if the opponent captures it, we can recapture it to control the center again. Then the opponent moves pawn to e6, takes, knight to f6, knight to c3, knight to c6. This variation is named according to the position of the game, where all 4 knights have developed. Then the most common reply from the white side is bishop e3. Go for bishop b4. White plays pawn to f3 to protect the e4 pawn. Okay, pawn to d5, takes, pawn to e5, knight to d7. You are attacking the white pawn, so white plays pawn to f4, pawn to c6, bishop d2, castling. White moves the bishop to e2 so that it can also castle. You also develop your bishop, kingside castle. Okay, we have already gone deep into this variation, which was not even necessary. This position has a 53% win rate for the black side. Let's talk about the next type of variation, and this is the most common variation of the Sicilian Defense, which starts with knight to c6. Then d4, takes, go for pawn to g6, pawn to c4. The idea behind this move is that white can develop this pawn to the center before knight to c3. Okay, bishop g7. There are 2 attackers on this knight but only 1 defender. So bishop to e3, knight to f6. Now you are targeting the white pawn, so knight to c3, kingside castle. Bishop e2, pawn to d6, kingside castle. Trust me, this opening is more aggressive from the black side. Let's talk about the next type of variation, for which you have to go a bit backward and start with pawn to e5. Knight to b5 is the most common move here. Pawn to d6, knight c3. This knight is bothering us a lot, so pawn to a6. Knight goes back, bishop e6. Knight d5 is not a good move for white, but still, it has been played a lot. Play knight to f6, bishop g5. Here you have a good chance to include your queen in the game, or to establish your dominance by capturing that knight. Now it's time for the last type of variation of this video, which starts with pawn to d6. Here, the most popular reply from the white side is pawn to d4, takes, knight to f6, knight to c3. If you have a little knowledge of the Sicilian Defense, you will know that this is a very common position, but if you are a beginner, don't worry, it's not a gambit. It's an actual opening that your opponent will have to play. Anyway, in this position, we are going to see 3 variations. Although there are more variations on this position, these 3 variations are very aggressive, especially the dragon and Najdorf variations, but they start with a6. The Najdorf variation is also called. White plays bishop e2 to be able to castle early. You go for pawn to e5. There are 3 benefits to this. First, you can move the knight away from the center. Second, you can develop the bishop. Third, you can castle kingside. Okay, knight to b3, bishop e7. Both kings castle. This pawn is very important for white, so white will play pawn to f4. You play knight d7. Now this opening has converted into middle game, and that is not the topic of this video. But this position also has a 54% win rate for white. Let's talk about the second type of variation of this position, which starts with pawn to e6. Then white plays bishop to e2 to be able to castle kingside. No problem, we will also castle kingside. Castle, castle. This opening is not that special, but I thought I should tell you. But the third variation is my favorite, which starts with pawn to g6, and we know this variation as the dragon variation. The most common reply from white here is bishop to e3, bishop g7, pawn to f3, knight c6, queen d2, kingside castle, bishop to c4, bishop to d7, kingside castle, rook to c8. You might be thinking, why am I moving so fast? It's because I have already made a dedicated video on the dragon variation, which you can watch after this video. But before that, if you are a beginner or an intermediate player, it would be very difficult for you to implement an opening in a real game, because most of the time, the opponent does not play the opening that we have learned, because either your opponent has learned some other opening, or she does not have knowledge of that opening. And once you start the game, you cannot resign, otherwise your ELO rating may decrease. The best way to avoid this is to not play this opening against a human, but play it against a chess bot, which has two advantages. First, it doesn't matter how weak that chess bot is. It is trained on almost all openings. And second, if that chess bot doesn't play the opening you have learned, you can simply resign and rematch, which will not decrease your ELO rating. But always remember my point that practice the opening against a bot whose ELO rating is lower than yours, or against which you can easily win. This video was part 1 of the Sicilian Defense, in which we saw some variations of the open Sicilian. If you want part 2 of this video, where we talk about the closed Sicilian, then complete 100 likes on this video, and you can watch the dragon variation by clicking on this video. I will meet you there. Bye.